Good morning, Morai V'Rabotai, Bruchim Habayim. We are continuing our Masechet Rosh Hashanah. We are on Daf Chaf Gimel Amud Bet by the last Mishnah of the Daf. Today's Amud is being learned as a Zechut Refuah Shelema for Rachel Simcha Bad Nahid, Daniel Moshe Ben Farangis Avraham, Binyamin Bad Rina, Kela Bad Nazi, Sikalit Bad Yafa, Levi Halevi Ben Leah. That should all have Refuah Shelema Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. This Amud is also being learned. Leilui Nishmat, Shahin, Esther Bat Yehuda, Harav Moshe Yisrael Ben Harav Binyamin, Harav Ezra David Ben Rab Naftali Halevi, that the Neshamot should have an Aliyah Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. This month's learning of the community has been graciously dedicated by the Shea family, should be an ultimate zchut for their mishpacha. Amen. So now we're going to get into the crux of how actually they dealt with the Edim. We learned already that the Edim would rush to come to the Bedin. They would come to this comfortable, but at the same time confined place, a beautiful smorgasbord, a beautiful caterer, and the Bedin would actually meet with the Edim to cross-examine them right there. Now, cross-examination of the Edim is for making sure they're not fake, they're not forged, they're not part of the Baitusim and Kutim and so on and so forth. But also, you want to make sure that they saw what they say they saw, and it was not some sort of hallucination, or they saw something else and they thought it was the moon. You want to make sure with some basic questions based on the knowledge of the Chachamim of how the moon should have been seen at this point of time. When we say point of time, we mean that they realized obviously that they are in the northern hemisphere, and they're also the seasons of the summer versus winter makes a difference, and what time of the day it was seen, and all of that would make a difference in the way the moon should have been seen. And if they heard something exactly opposite of that, obviously would mean that either the Ed is not for real, or he has no idea what he's saying. You know, it's not necessarily what he saw. Certainly was not the moon. May have been something else. So they would disregard those eduyot, and also would give them a platform to cross-examine the two edim that they claim they saw the moon together, whether or not they are in sync with the questions that they are asked. So says the Mishnah, Ketzad botkin et haedim. How would they actually check the edim? Zuk sheba rishon botkin oto rishon. First and foremost, if you have a bunch of edim that come in, it's first comes, first served. Also, really first come, first in, first out. Right? You want to be sensitive to their time, and also to the fact that there was rizim maktimim lemitzvot. They were the ones that got there first. So you would check the first set of edim before anyone else. The omrin lo, and they would take in the older one. Umachnisin et hagadol shbahen. You would take the greatest one, the oldest one, in first, and you would tell him, Emor, tell us, ketzad ra'ita et halvana. Explain what you saw exactly, right? And part of the questionnaire would be, Lifnei hachama or le'achar hachama. Was it before the sun? Was it after the sun? Which at this point, we are under the impression that before the sun, after the sun means, did you see it right before Shkia? Did you see it right after Shkia, so to speak? Was it before or after the sun that you saw it? Was it Lisfona, or was it Lidroma? Was it to the north or to the south of the sun? Now, a little explanation, which is important and is also just interesting to know for us. In the northern hemisphere, when you have the sun, and when we talk about rising and setting, being moving in the sky, obviously we are referring to the way it is behold by us, the way we perceive it. Obviously, they are moving. The moon is moving. The sun seems to be moving because of the spin of the Earth, and that obviously has to do with the moon moving as well, but not the way that we see it. We see the same side of the moon at all times, because the movement of the Earth and the moon have been in sync in a way that you always see the same half of the moon, even though that everything is moving around. So we see the sun and the moon, anything that rises in the east, and it's not just in the east, it is on the southeast. So it's actually interesting when you have Netzach Hama, you could actually see it from here. That would be from southeast, and the movement that's perceived by us would be going towards west, obviously, but also towards the north. It goes from southeast to northwest, right? So when it's setting, whether it is to the Safon or to the Darom, would be actually a thing. When you see the sun set and the moon by the Molad on the 30th day, the moon would be seen in the same side of the sky where the sun would set. So therefore, it is shayach to ask where exactly the position was. Was it before? Was it after? Was it to the north? Was it to the south? Was it to the left or to the right? Which would mean to, if you're facing, for instance, the west, so the Darom obviously would be to your left, and the Safon would be to your right. So those questions are shayach to be asked from the Edim, because we understand how it should look. The people who are more sophisticated in understanding the celestial beings and so on, and the Betin, part of their job of the Betin in Yerushalayim was to know all the nitty-gritties of these things, and they would ask simple questions that a layman could answer, but those answers would be very profound in deciding whether or not what they're saying makes any sense in reality of what should be expected, and based on that, they would either confirm or reject the edut. So says the Gemara. So at this moment, we think before and after means before Shkia, after Shkia. That's what we are thinking. And then they would ask them, Kama haya gavoa, how high was it to your sight? How high was it from the Othik, from where would be the horizon? How high was it? Right? We'll see in the Gemara that the layman would give an answer of, based on how high the staff of a regular person would be when you're riding your donkey or guiding your donkey, and you would have the staff. Those would be measurements people would use. So if a person says he was, 5 mardeot up versus 1 mardat, those are very different. What exactly is going to be point of an acceptable error, we will discuss. So again, we're talking about non-sophisticated measurements. Obviously, we're not talking about like astrologists coming to Bedin necessarily. We're talking about the regular layman, and the questions would be crafted based on them, and the answers would be examined based on those, and the margin of error would be measured that way as well. So it says how high was it? And what was the tilt? Was the tilt to the Darom, or was the tilt to the Safon? The Kamaya Rachav, how wide was it? Right? Sometimes, depending on where you're holding in the year, sometimes you see a larger moon. You expect it to be seeing a larger moon, sometimes a smaller one, depending on how close it is, and so on and so forth. And now the Gemara says, if the guy says, I saw the moon lifnei hachama, right, before, again, we're thinking that means before the sunset, right, then lo amar klum, impossible. Because one of the impossibilities is that you, on the 30th day, you will never see the moon before sunset, right? You will see it in the same place, maybe right after sunset, but because the spread of the light after the sunset is dim enough for you to be able to see the faded little thing of the moon, which is very, very in the very beginning of it. So it's not a whole lot of the moon to see. Therefore, it would only be visible after the sunset. So if he says before, you say Hazaku Baruch next, right? That means that he's completely off the chart. He doesn't know what he's talking about, or he's fake, and we reject it. Now, after you check the first one, you bring the second guy, and we check him as well. Now we're checking him for the questions, and also we're cross-examining what these two people said as a group. If they both answered the right questions and they're both in sync with each other, then we accept that edut. Now, imagine you bring the first group of edim, and then you accept their edut, and there are 40 other groups of edim outside. What do? You say, well, I have to learn as a dayan, right? It's bitul Torah, and go outside. They don't want to waste their time. You go outside and you announce, Hazak Baruch, go home. It says, absolutely not. What you do, says the Mishnah, is Sha'ar kol ha-zukot, all of the rest of the zugot. You could have dozens of other zugot. You bring them in, Shalom Aleichem, you sit them down, you ask them some basic questions about the edut halevanam. Sha'alin otan rashe devarim. You ask them just the main questions. You don't drill them. You don't go through details. Lo shayu slichim, not because we need them. We already have the edut that we need. But why? Because ela kedesh lo yetzu bepahei nefesh. Because you don't want them to go out bepahei nefesh. You don't want them to be disappointed. They came all this way from their city to Yerushalayim to make an edut. You don't want them to be disregarded. At least they sit in front of the Gdolim, they sit in front of the Dayanim, they get to have a Shalom Aleichem, sit down, they feel adequate when they feel they added something, right? This is not a Shalom Bayit class, but parenthetically, when your kids run over to tell you something and you already know it, right? Think of this Mishnah. When your wife comes to tell you something and you happen to already know it, think of this Mishnah. You don't want people to walk away with pachei nefesh, right? Now, that their thing was not just, the human sensitivity. They also wanted them to be encouraged, but obviously you want your family to always feel encouraged as well. But nevertheless, they would go through all of the kitot edim that came to testify. They would have a short time with each one of them. They would ask basic questions, again, to encourage them that they should not be disappointed when they worked so hard to come, and they should not go home empty-handed, so to speak. Because you never know. Next month, maybe this guy would be the only person that would see the moon, right? Now you feel all good about yourself that you have 40 sets of edim. Next month, you may have nothing if this guy doesn't come. And therefore, you want people to be feeling encouraged to come. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. When you tell me two questions, that the initial questions that the Mishnah introduced was, they would ask them, did you see ואומרים לה כיצד ראית את הלבנה? לפני החמה או לאחר החמה? לצפונה או לדרומה? Right? Those are the first two questions. Says Gemara, that's the same question. Right? Litzvona or lidroma means which one of them set first. Right? That basically is lifnei hachama or la'achar hachama. Is the same question. So why are you asking the same question? Can't be. One of them you're not explaining correctly. So says the Gemara, Hainu lifnei hachama, hainu litzvona. Lifnei hachama is the same thing as tzvona, right? And the achar hachama, hainu lidroma. Says the Gemara, Amar Abaye. Abaye says, no. Lifnei hachama and the achar hachama, you made a mistake. That's not what he means. Amar Abaye, pegimatah lifnei hachama or la'achar hachama. We are referring to where the bow, the dark side of the moon is facing, right? I mean, in the beginning of the month, the moon is not full, so it looks like a bow. And inside of it, the empty part, so to speak, is it facing the sun or was it facing off the sun? Now, obviously, we know, right, that the empty side of the moon never is facing the sun, right? It's never facing the sun. So, but not every layman, especially in Tam Chazal, knew that, right? And therefore, it was a legitimate question to ask. It was an easy way to know if they actually saw the moon, or they maybe saw something else, or they saw nothing, and they're just pretending, right? So says the Gemara, if he says, yeah, I was facing the sun, we say, Hazak Baruch, next, right? And the guy has no idea what he's saying, or he is a false witness, and we will send him out and bring the next guy. Lo amar klum. He said nothing. Now, obviously, the Gemara knows what he knows because of what he knows, and we know this because of the way the reflection of light works and so on, but everything has to have a pasuk, everything has to have a midrash. Says the Gemara, Damar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, my dichtiv, what is the deepest meaning of the pasuk that talks about HaKadosh Baruch Hu making peace up above, Hamshel v'fachad imo oseh shalom bimromav, a pasuk Yov that talks about HaKadosh Baruch Hu doing oseh shalom bimromav, right? We use this obviously, right? Hu b'rahamav yaseh shalom aleinu. So what does it mean, Hashem making peace up there? What the Malachim are fighting, Shalom Bayit problems, what exactly is shalom up there? So says the Gemara, is actually talking about the very first celestial machloket up in the heaven, which everyone knows about. Rashi brings it in Parashat Bereshit, Shnei meorot hakdolim, that sun and the moon both were considered meorot hakdolim, however you slice that, based on the Rishonim and the Midrashim, and the moon came complaining, said, can't be. You have a world with two kings, can't be, right? Should be only one. And Hashem says, oh tazoi. He said, good, right? Lechi umati et atzmech. The result of that complaint did not end well. The one that had to be diminished was the moon, and says Rabbi Yochanan, this pasuk is speaking about, again, the shalom that HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes. Listen to the sensitivity. Says the Gemara, me'olam lo ra'ata chama p'gimata shel levana, that the chama would never ever be able to see the p'gima of the levana. We'll never see it that way, right? So that's oseh shalom bimrom. Now, it's not only the matter of shalom and again sensitivity, but the Gemara explains a different aspect to this as well. V'lo p'gimata shel keshet. Also doesn't see the p'gima of keshet, right? Of the bow. P'gimata shel levana, the chal shadata. The p'gima of the levana I can't see, because again, the matter of sensitivity over here, that should not, what was taken away, so to speak, from the levana should not be exposed to the chama, and at the same time, pegimata shel keshet delo lemru of the chama, they should not say, or the people would be, Sunday, Monday, sun after sun, Monday after the moon day, right? That's how it works. People used to actually worship the celestial beings. So, and Ovdei Chama was a massive, massive draw to people. Again, the Midrash that speaks about Avraham Avinu, the way Rambam in the beginning of Yechod Avodah Zarah explains it. It says that the family and the country of Avraham Avinu would be bowing to the sun and bowing to the moon and so on, and he's going there to the temple with them, and people are bowing, and he's like, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense, right? This doesn't make any sense, because if the sun is the thing, well, he goes down, the moon, the whole thing doesn't make sense, and he was able to make sense of all of those together, realizing that there's something, a higher being, a higher power that governs all of these things. But again, at the same time, many of these people existed, The truth of the matter is the Zoroastrians, or the Persians in the Chevra, I don't know how much exposure you had to the Zoroastrians, but that was the original religion before Islam entered the areas of Babylonia and Paras and Madai, and they were actually of the Achama. They would serve the sun and serve the fire, right? They actually they up to today, well, I should say up to 27 years ago at least, because I had a classmate that was Zoroastrian, and I actually grilled him on this. I was like, "Is it true that you worship the fire?" And it's like, "Well, we daven, facing the thing. We have respect for it." He kind of wiggled his way out of it, but the original Zoroastrians, they actually worship the fire, right? And hence those who know what Charsha Mesuri is and so on and so forth, and the slogans that they say and so on. So that's for those who come from that culture. This was a real thing. This was an actually real thing, and therefore, in order for Ovdei Chama not to say, well, you know why the bow is facing, the empty side of it is facing the sun? Because the sun is eating at it, right? That's what happens when you go against the sun, so to speak, right? Right? That's the logic. Says the Gemara, that they should not say girika mishdia, that the sun is shooting arrows towards the keshet, and that's why it is empty, that side of it facing the chama. Right? Says Rashi, giri kamashtia hachama azot chitzimi yora lehilachem bekofrimba. The chama is fighting its deniers, right? That's what people would say naturally, but now they can't say that because it's the opposite of what logically would seem to them to be correct, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu did that in order to not leave an opening mouth for people who are of the Chama. Says the Gemara, Tanachada litzvona, devarav kayamin, lidroma lo amar klum. There is one writer that says, if the witness says that the moon was to the tzafon of the sun, then devarav kayamin. Again, as we explained, the way it works is coming from southeast and going to northwest. That's the path of anything that rises and sets. And the moon also in the 30th, if you would be having a Rosh Chodesh, it would be together in the place of the Shkia seen there, and it depends really where. Now we know that it depends what season and how it works, but the Gemara is going to actually go through that examination. One writer says if the Ed says it was litzfonah, devarav kayamin. If it says lidromai was to the south, and devarav kayamin, it's not lo amar klum. He said nothing. But says the Gemara, there's another writer exactly the opposite. The other writer says, this was Tanachada. Tanya, didn't we learn if exactly the opposite? Lidromah devarav kayamin. That if he says to the south, then he has said correctly. But if he says lisfonah, if he says to the north, lo amar klum. He said nothing. Says the Gemara, lo kash. That's not a question. Can't be mota chama, can't be mota geshamim. It depends really what season it is. That makes the difference of where you would see the moon in comparison to the sun setting down, and that's part of, again, a confusing fact that the Dayanim would know, but not necessarily the layman. They also obviously know that the sun just set. So was it to the right? Was it to the left? Right? That everyone could understand, because if you're facing west, looking at the sun setting in the west, so then you could tell to the right of it would be Darom, to the left of it, sorry, it would be Darom, to the right of it would be Safon. So they will know where they saw it. They should know where they saw it in comparison to the sunset, because it's happening all together right after each other. And we actually put a lot of credence on that because we know that Bimot HaChama is this way, Bimot HaGeshamim is that way, and therefore it will be important to ask. Says the Gemara. Tarabanan. Echad omer gavoa bet mardeot, ve'echad omer gimel. So when you asked him how high it was, right? We asked them how high it was, and one of them says, well, it was, if I put my mardat, if I put my stick, and the bottom of it would be by the horizon, this was 2 mardeot up. And the other one says, no, it wasn't 2, it was 3. That's within the margin of error, right? And that, the Gemara says, elutan kayemet. It's not a problem. That's a margin of error that's acceptable. People do make a mistake like that, even though that they're both referring to the same time that they saw it together. But if one of them says it was 3, echad omer gimel ve'echad omer hey, elutam betela. That's already a much bigger difference. Hey mardeot is all the way up in the sky, and that's not a mistake that should be made, and therefore elutam betela. But it's not elutam betela in a way that now this person is not trustworthy. We don't know which one is trustworthy, but each one of them now could be combined with another ed that will come and say the same thing. So if this ed said 5 mardeot up, that was the height, and the other one said 3. Okay, so both these cannot be one group together. But if a third person, if you have a third person coming and say, "What's 5?" Now you have 5 and you have 5. Or if we would say 3, you have 3 and 3, and that would be a new group of edim now, provided that all the other things check out. It says Gemara, if they say we saw it in the water, that means we didn't see the actual moon. We weren't able to see, but we saw the reflection of the moon in the water, right? That we were able to see. Or Ra'inu ba'ashashit, or we saw it through a glass, right? Ra'inu ba'avim, we saw it over some of the clouds. It was cloudy, but we saw the image of the Levana over the clouds, and meidin alav, right? Then you're not going to accept that edut. That's not considered the edut that we want. If they say we saw half of it in the water, half of it in the clouds, or half of it in through the glass, and meidin alav, then it also can't. That's not an edut that we want either. So it says, wait a second. Hashta kulo amrad lo hesyo mibaya. If they say we saw the whole moon that's supposed to be visible, not the whole moon, obviously, right? The whole moon, the whole part of the moon that's supposed to be visible. If they say we saw the whole thing in the water, the whole thing over the clouds, the whole thing over from a glass, is not good. Now, half of it is a question. Obviously, half of it is not going to be good. The whole thing you saw would not be good. Koshken, if you didn't even see half of it, you only saw half of it, and that also was through the water, through the glass, through the clouds, that should be pashut. What's the question? Says the Gemara, that's not what we meant. We saw actually half of it clearly in the rakia, but the other half we saw the reflection in the water, or half of it was clear, not covered by the clouds. Half of it was covered by the clouds, and same with the glass. We saw half of it outside the edge of the glass. The other half we saw through the glass. Even that would not be sufficient. Says Gemara, chetzio ba'avim, chetzio b'rakia, chetzio ba'ashashit, chetzio b'rakia, and maiden. That's not considered a viable edut either. Tarabanan. Ra'inu ve'shuv lo ra'inu. We saw it for a moment, and then it disappeared. Poof. We were able to see it afterwards. And maiden alav. That's also not a solid visibility that the Betin would actually go for. It has to be something that is considered a solid sight that it was not going away. You looked at it, you gazed at it, you saw it, and you're sure about what you saw. It's not that, I looked, it was there, and then I looked again, it wasn't there, right? That's not something that the Beit Din is going to go for. Says the Gemara.
Do we use this for criteria similarly when we make Kiddush Levana? Like if we look through the window from the shul, we see the moon, can we do that to do Kiddush Levana?
Well, not all of them. You're basically asking, are we learning the halachot of Kiddush Levana from this?
Yeah, there's some similarities.
There are many similarities, but the answer is not necessarily, right? Kiddush Levana has a lot of halachot that would or would not be the same as this. For instance, nowadays, seeing it through glasses that you have is not a problem. Like through a glass, it's a massive question. And also you have to understand the ashashit that we talk about is not the glass that we have nowadays. Ashashit that we talk about is more like the glasses that you see over here, tinted glasses, right? It was not, the glass that they had was not as smooth, and therefore, and was also not as pure. So therefore, the sight that you saw through a glass was not as clear and was not as accurate, right? Because for it being clearly see-through, you need it to be purified, and you also need it to be straight, and not inside of it should not have waves, for it not to distort the light that comes through. And in the time of Chazal, the ashashit that they talk about was not, again, what we have as clear glass. It was more of a vague vision that you saw through it, and therefore would not be acceptable. Now, says the Gemara, all of these people saw all of this and we discard them. Says the Gemara, so we saw it and we didn't see it afterwards, and made it. And the Gemara says, Kol haki chazu la ve'azli? Says Rashi, take a look. Kol haki chazu ve'azli bitmi. It's a question. Me'achar shra'u lama lo ya'idu. They saw it. They say they saw it. Why shouldn't they be testifying? They have to see it forever. They saw it for a moment. They couldn't see it afterwards, right? They should stay there for 2 hours and gaze at it. If they actually know that they saw it, right? So they didn't see it afterwards. Shouldn't be destroying their. I understand through the clouds. I understand through the glass. I understand reflection on the water. Those all could be very mistaken. But if they actually saw a clear sky and a clear moon, and then they couldn't find it afterwards, why would we let them go? Says Gemara, Amar Abaye, Achikamar, Ra'inu me'eleinu v'shavnu l'roto midatenu v'lo ra'inu. Right? We saw it as a corner of our eyes. Our sight caught it, and then when we paid attention to see it for the edut, then we couldn't see it. Now, you have to be able to see it for edut, for that sight to count. If you think you saw it at the corner of your eye, right, and then you look, in order to actually be an ed, you look carefully and there's nothing there, then you really didn't see it. But erachinami, if you looked for edut, I saw exactly a moon, the way that checks all the boxes that we mentioned, and then a minute later you couldn't find it, that's fine. You don't have to be seeing it for continuous amount of time, but this is not referring to that. This is referring to what happens to everybody. You're driving, you're walking, you're horseback riding, whatever it is, and you think you see something on the corner of your eye, right? It's your subconscious sight that you have, the awareness of the brain, but then you actually look for it, it's not there. That is not a sight that we're impressed with, hence we're not going to accept that as they do it. We have a little left to the Mishnah, but we're gonna leave this. We're gonna do it tomorrow morning. Chazak Baruch.